Welcome back to Cultura Underground. Today we have a very special episode. It's about Christmas! Yay! Christmas in Mexico is a little bit different from other countries. In Mexico City, Christmas celebrations are a combination of both pre-Hispanic as well as Spanish traditions. So join us today as we look at what makes Christmas time so special here in Mexico City. And Feliz Navidad! Unlike U.S. traditions, Christmas traditions in Mexico don't focus much on December 25th. Instead, the Christmas time season is a whole collection of celebrations, colloquially known as the Marathon Guadalupe-Reyes, referring to the endless run of festivities between December 12th, the day of Our Lady Guadalupe, and January 6th, the day of Epiphany, more popularly known as the Day of the Three Wise Men, or Los Reyes Magos. I want to give a brief disclaimer that this video won't have in-person recordings because I went to visit my family for the holidays and thus I'm not in Mexico to record. But I still wanted to explore how current Christmas traditions are the evangelical vestiges of conversion efforts by Catholic missionaries during the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs or Mexica peoples. As previously mentioned, the festive period known as the Marathon Guadalupe-Reyes kicks off with the day and feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, known as Dia de Nuestra Señora Guadalupe in Mexico. Every year, millions of pilgrims descend upon the Basilica of Guadalupe in the neighborhood of Tepeyac, Gustavo Amadero, in Mexico City. 2020's pilgrimage was thwarted by COVID, but some 6 million people attended the festivities in 2021. According to legend, in 1531, 12 years after the Spanish arrival in Mexico, an apparition of the Virgin Mary appeared to an Aztec convert to Christianity on December 9th. The man, called Cuatlatoatzin in Nahuatl and baptized as Juan Diego by the Franciscan friars, was walking along Tepeyac Hill when a vision of a woman appeared before him, speaking in his native tongue of Nahuatl. She called herself Guadalupe, and told him she was the mother of the true God and that a shrine honoring her was to be built on that very spot. The Virgin Guadalupe sent Juan Diego to Fray Juan de Zumarraga, Archbishop of the recently created Viceroyalty of New Spain. But the Archbishop was unconvinced and demanded evidence, so Juan Diego returned to Tepeyac Hill. There, the vision of the Virgin Guadalupe appeared once more and told him to pick roses and put them in his tilma, a cloak-like garment worn by Aztec men. On December 12th, when Juan Diego returned to the archbishop and opened his tilma, a cascade of 12 roses tumbled out to reveal the image of the Virgin Guadalupe imprinted on his cloak. Now convinced, the archbishop ordered a chapel to be built on Tepeyac Hill in the Virgin Guadalupe's honor, and Juan Diego's tilma was preserved inside as a religious relic. A chapel still sits on the hill, but the tilma was later moved to the old Basilica of Guadalupe, built between the 17th and 18th centuries, and then finally to the modern basilica, which is where it resides today. Now, the association of Tepeyac Hill with the motherly apparition existed long before the arrival of the Spanish to Mexico. According to stories collected by the Spanish friars, the mother of the gods, known as Tonantzin, would appear to the Mexicas and other Nahua people on the top of Tepeyac Hill. Fray Juan de Torquemada writes in his 1615 text, Monarchia Indiana, that Tonantzin was, quote, very venerated by the natives, and appeared to one of them at a time in the form of a young girl in a white robe, and revealed secret things to the person, end quote. Fray Bernardino de Sahagún writes of a temple dedicated to Tonantzin on the top of Tepeyac, and of how men and women from all over the Valley of Mexico came to make sacrifices and pay her tribute. In addition, Celebrations honoring Tonantzin around the winter solstice corresponded with the Julian calendar's December 12th, the calendar used by the Spanish Empire until 1528. Now, knowing that the cult of Tonantzin was already important in pre-Hispanic Mexico, it's not hard to see how the cult of Our Lady of Guadalupe easily proselytized the Mexica peoples. Furthermore, a Spanish version of the Virgin of Guadalupe also existed pre-conquest. A similar 14th century legend comes from the Castile region of Spain, wherein a shepherd named Gil Cordero found a bronze statue of the Virgin Mary, who was said to have worked miracles. She was named La Virgen de Extremadura, and years later, during the conquest of the Americas, she was named protector of the indigenous natives of the New World due to her dark complexion. Hernán Cortés, the conqueror of Tenochtitlan, carried her standard when he entered the city, and the Mexican historian Edmundo O'Gorman states that by 1530, even before Juan Diego's vision, many Franciscan friars had already built hermitages dedicated to the Spanish version of the Virgin of Guadalupe and attempts to replace the pagan rites of Tonantzin with a Catholic one. So, did Our Lady of Guadalupe really appear to the Aztec convert Juan Diego on this day? Or was it simply a merging of one mother figure for another in order to convert the Mexica peoples to Catholicism? There is no documented account of this apparition until 1648. The archbishop approached by Juan Diego wasn't even consecrated until 3 years after their alleged encounter, and he never makes mention of Juan Diego nor Our Lady of Guadalupe in his writings, which one would think should have at least made his top 10 list that year. There were, however, various oral accounts of the apparition, and the image imprinted in the cloak was described by an English prisoner in Mexico City in 1568. The story of Juan Diego and the Virgin of Guadalupe was also published in the indigenous language of Nahuatl in the 1649 text Nican Mopaua. Our Lady of Guadalupe was declared patroness of Mexico City in 1737, and in 1755, Pope Benedict XIV granted her the official feast and Mass Day on December 12th. Although in Mexico City, the big festivity is actually on the night of December 11th, and many pilgrims even begin heading home on the morning of December 12th, I guess to beat all the pedestrian traffic on the highways. Following December 12th, the next most important date in the Marathon Guadalupe-Reyes is December 16th, which marks the beginning of Las Posadas, a 9-day-long devotional prayer commemorating the nativity story of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. The word posada means lodging or accommodation in Spanish, and the 9 days represent the 9 months of Mary's pregnancy. Traditional celebrations of Las Posadas include a 14-verse call and response song reenacting Joseph and Mary's hopes of lodging at a Bethlehem inn. Prior to each night's celebration, neighbors will decide who will be the pilgrims, or peregrinos in Spanish, and which house will be the hosts, or anfitriones. The pilgrims, representing Joseph, sing a verse asking for lodging, to which the hosts, representing the innkeeper, respond with a verse denying them said lodging. The verses go back and forth like this until the 5th call and response, when the hosts suddenly and for no apparent reason finally recognize Joseph and Mary and mercifully allow them entry. The second to last verse is sung by everyone together, and the final verse is the pilgrims thanking the hosts for their good charity. Then, the neighbors representing the hosts invite the other neighbors representing the pilgrims in for food and drink. And following the feast, a 7-coned star Christmas piñata is taken out to be swung at. These celebrations are repeated for 9 nights until December 24th, the final posada, when the baby Jesus is swaddled and placed in the nativity scene. The origins of Las Posadas date back centuries. In 10th and 11th century Europe, dramatizations of biblical stories were used to teach religious doctrine to the largely illiterate population. Although banned by the church after non-religious inclusions overshadowed the original stories, they were reintroduced in the 16th century by 2 Spanish saints in the form of the Christmas pageant. The Spaniards brought this dramatization of the Christmas pageant to the New World, where it quickly proved successful in spreading Catholicism to the Aztecs. You see, the Mexica people kept an oral history, so dramatizations as a way of remembering were already familiar to them, as were festivals during the month of December. In addition to the Divine Mother Tonantzin being honored around the winter solstice, one of the most important deities, the sun god of war Huitzilopochtli, was said to have been born during the month of December, and his birth was celebrated during the December festival of Panquetzalitzli. The parallel in time between Panquetzalitzli and Christmas lent itself to an almost seamless merging of the two holidays. Both occurred in December, and both celebrated the Divine Mother giving birth to the God of Light. So after seeing this reliance upon recounting oral histories, the Spanish missionaries used the newly reinvented European religious pageants to completely supplant the December festivals of the birth of Huitzilopochtli. In 1568, Friar Diego de Soria obtained a papal bull from Pope Sixtus V, stating that a specific Christmas Mass should be observed throughout Mexico on the 9 days preceding Christmas Day, and thus the first official posadas, then known as the Misas de Aguinaldo, were introduced in Alcolman de Nezahualcóyotl in the state of Mexico that year. Nowadays, the traditions are somewhat dying out in Mexico City. Friends of mine recounted huge neighborhood affairs when they were children, with fun-filled fiestas all of the 9 nights. But although they may still be observed in the more traditional and family-oriented neighborhoods of Mexico City, I've never seen the full 9-night posadas observed in any of the 4 neighborhoods I've lived in. In fact, the posadas that I've been invited to have all been decidedly non-religious end-of-the-year work or friend Christmas parties. And instead of 9 nights of fiestas and piñatas, most of my friends only celebrate and bring out the piñata on Christmas Eve, known as La Nochebuena in Spanish. Which brings us to our next date on the marathon, December 24th, which is indeed a much bigger holiday in Mexico than December 25th. Christmas Day, the 25th, is a day for resting and leftovers, but the 24th is the day of the final traditional posada, and religious celebrants attend a late-night mass called the Mass of the Rooster, a tradition begun about 6 years following the arrival of the Spanish by Father Pedro de Cante. The Mass's name comes from the belief that the birth of Jesus was announced by a rooster crowing, and the late-night Mass became popular among the newly converted Aztecs since it included many elements from the Panquetzalitzli festival and celebration of Huitzilopochtli's birth, such as fireworks, torches, sparklers, and plays, along with food and dancing. As such, the big Christmas meal is enjoyed on the 24th, traditionally consisting of stuffed pork loin, dried salted codfish called bacalao, apple salad, and a dish called romeritos, or little rosemary, which is a stew of sprigs of seepweed, an herb resembling rosemary, that are then boiled in a mole sauce seasoned with shrimp jerky, potatoes, nopales, and rehydrated shrimp. Following the feast, it's time for the Christmas Eve piñata. Nowadays, people hang piñatas for many celebrations, including birthdays and other festivities. But it actually originated as a Christmas tradition, and although I think most people in the world would associate piñatas only with Mexico, the tradition can actually be traced back to 13th century China. When Marco Polo arrived in China, he saw clay figurines of animals being covered with colored paper and adorned with ribbons in celebration of the Chinese New Year. During the celebrations, the figurines were knocked with hard sticks, spilling the seeds inside them. Marco Polo then brought these colorful clay figurines back to Italy, and Italians began using them to celebrate Lent. In Italy, the first Sunday of Lent became known as Pignata Sunday. The Italian word pignata translates into clay pot, and is probably the most likely etymology of the word since the original piñatas were made out of clay. At some point, the tradition of hitting the Italian pignatas for Lent traveled from Catholic Italy to Catholic Spain, where the first Sunday of Lent was celebrated with the dance of the piñata. Thus, when the Spanish missionaries arrived in Mexico, they probably saw a similarity in the clay jars, filled with offerings and decorated with colorful feathers that the Aztecs hung on a pole to break as an offering to Huitzilopochtli during Panquetzalitzli. And they probably saw a similarity in the Mayan game, wherein blindfolded players attempted to hit a clay pot suspended by a string. The Spanish missionaries used these similarities in customs to help convert the Aztecs and Mayans to Catholicism. But instead of continuing the piñata's association with Lent, they instead began hanging piñatas for Christmas to reflect the clay pot offerings during the December festival of Panquetzalitzli. The first documented inclusion of the piñata in Christmas celebrations dates to the same year as the first posada, in 1568. Those original Christmas piñatas were made of clay and filled with dried fruits and sweets, but modern piñatas are often now made of cardboard and filled with candy instead. Although, one friend recounted breaking a piñata as a child and finding rather squished guayabas as the reward. Gross. The traditional Christmas piñata is a brightly colored 7-coned star, with each cone representing one of the 7 deadly sins, and the bright colors representing Satan disguising himself as an angel of light. Religious symbolism aside, the cones are also a very convenient way to carry home all of your spilled loot from the piñata. The breaking of the piñata represents the triumph of good over evil, and the sweets inside, the temptation of earthly pleasures and wealth. Taking from the Mayan tradition of blindfolding the participants, the piñata uses blindfolds to represent the blind faith one should have in Jesus. Those watching can either help you or purposefully deceive you, but it is only through faith that you can reach the piñata. Participants are spun around 33 times before they can even attempt to hit the piñata, representing the 33 years of Jesus' life. The Spanish missionaries used the piñata game to teach the important virtues in the Catechism: faith, hope, and charity. Participants looked upwards towards the heavens at the hung piñata above them with hope that their stick, representing virtue, would triumph over evil and break the piñata, thus justly rewarding those who had kept faith. Finally, since everyone got to share in the piñata's reward, it was also a symbol of charity. The piñata, accompanied by the Christmas pageantry of the posadas, taught one singular lesson to the newly converted indigenous peoples of Mexico: that only through virtuous faith in Jesus Christ will one receive the rewards of heaven. Now, I had never associated piñatas with a religious message before. I'd only ever swung at them at birthday celebrations, but even then I was very familiar with the song that always accompanies the game. Dale, 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 no pierdes el tino, porque si lo pierdes, pierdes el camino. Hit it, hit it, hit it, don't lose your focus, because if you lose it, you'll lose your path. Now hearing that song, I can't help but see a very religious significance behind the words. In Mexico, artisans began hand-making the piñatas for Christmas celebrations starting in October to meet demand. Unfortunately, the industry was devastated by COVID, since no parties meant few piñatas sold. In addition, it's extremely labor-intensive, taking days to complete, and selling at only around $20 to $30 per piñata, the money they earn hardly compensates for the work invested. But hey, only through faith and virtue, right? Besides the piñata, another ubiquitous symbol of Christmas time in Mexico is the Flor de Nochebuena, or Christmas Eve flower, known in the U.S. as the poinsettia flower. The flower is native to Mexico and was called Cuetlazochitl in Nahuatl, meaning flower that grows in residues. The Aztecs valued the flower for its medicinal fever-reducing abilities and used the petal in making red dye, and also believed the flowers were a symbol of fallen warriors receiving new life. The tradition of using the Nochebuena flower during Christmas time dates back to the 16th century, when a young girl called Pepita, or Maria, was too poor to provide a gift for the celebration of Jesus' birth. Legend says that an angel appeared to the girl and inspired her to gather weeds from the roadside and place them in front of the church altar. Upon laying the weeds at the foot of the altar, they suddenly sprouted huge, bright crimson blossoms and transformed into the poinsettia flower. Everyone who saw agreed that it was a miracle, and so in Mexico, the flower became known as the Christmas Eve flower, or Flor de Nochebuena. The legend became codified into Christmas tradition when Franciscan friars in the 17th century began including the flowers in their celebrations. For the friars, the star-shaped leaf pattern symbolized the Star of Bethlehem. The red color represented the blood sacrifice of Jesus' crucifixion, and the white-petaled variety represented his purity. But if you're watching from the U.S., you'll also recognize this flower as an important symbol in U.S. Christmas traditions. That's because the first U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Joel Roberts Poinsett, brought back the flower to the U.S. in 1825. As a result of Ambassador Poinsett introducing the flower to the United States, it became known as the poinsettia in English. However, they didn't become a staple of the U.S. Christmas market until the 20th century, when a man by the name of Paul Eck Jr. became single-handedly responsible for associating the plant with Christmas in the U.S. Paul Eck Jr. sent free plants to television stations to display them from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and appeared on programs like The Tonight Show and Bob Hope's Christmas specials to promote them. Until the 1990s, the Eck family had a virtual monopoly on the market due to a proprietary grafting technique that made their plants more attractive. It wasn't until a university researcher discovered the method and published it that competitors began to flourish, particularly those using lower-cost labor in Mexico, and thus the production hub of poinsettias, or the Noche Buena, returned to Mexico once again. Millions of Noche Buena flowers are sold from greenhouses in Mexico every year, like this one in the Xochimilco neighborhood of Mexico City. In the U.S., December 12th is National Poinsettia Day, commemorating the death of Joel Roberts Poinsett on that day. Now, if you'll remember, December 12th was also the winter solstice celebration of Tonantzin, and is the day of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico, a celebration which relies heavily on the Noche Buena flower for decoration. It is purely coincidental that the U.S.'s National Poinsettia Day falls on the same date as the Day of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but it is still an incredible coincidence. And that brings us to the end of Part 1 of our exploration of the Marathon Guadalupe-Reyes. In Part 2, we'll look at New Year's customs in Mexico, as well as the most important date along the marathon, the Three Kings Day, or Epiphany, on January 6th, known as Dia de los Tres Reyes Magos in Mexico. But these first celebrations along the marathon are some of the most fascinating from an anthropological perspective, since so many of them are a syncretism of Spanish Catholic and indigenous Aztec and Mayan traditions, resulting from the explicit conversion efforts of missionaries during and following the Spanish conquest. Although culturally Catholic, the imprint of indigenous belief structures can still be felt all over if you dig a little deeper. And Christmas time in Mexico City is no exception. So thanks for joining us. If you liked this video, please give us a like and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to come back and watch Part 2 of our Marathon Guadalupe-Reyes video, coming soon.